Welcome to Tuesday's edition of COVID-19. As expected, our daily tally today has rebounded to the 500 level, and observers believe this upward trend will continue as public movement has been on the rise in recent days. We also revisit diplomatic efforts on the vaccine front amid the pandemic blame game. Here first is the broader pandemic coverage with our Kwon-Soa. So to start us off then.
Sure, Sunny. There has been a rise by almost 50 new infections compared to Monday, with 511 cases reported as of 12 a.m. this Tuesday. And that includes 483 domestic transmissions and 28 cases from abroad. And we are seeing a rise in the capital's Seoul with 163 infections, followed by 138 in Gyeonggi-do province, and also an increase down in Gwangju with 24 cases. And we're also seeing the same number here on Jeju-do Island. This is the highest daily figure this island has seen this year so far. And that has raised the total number of infections here in Korea. We will take a look at the number later on, but here on this graph, we are seeing the numbers are fluctuating between the 400s and the 700s, but mainly in the 500s, just like today. And the total number of cases in Korea stands at 128,283. And also the country has lost 4 lives related to COVID-19 in the past day, raising the death toll to 1,879. And let's take a look at the vaccination updates now. We've got a little over 8,300 people who received their first shot of COVID-19 vaccination yesterday, and more than 77,500 people who got their second shot. Now, most people here in Korea are currently receiving the AstraZeneca vaccine, and the latest findings in Britain showed a single dose of the AstraZeneca vaccine lowers the risk of death from COVID-19 by 80%. And there is also good news over in the US for kids, as the FDA has given its green light for the emergency use of Pfizer vaccines for those aged between 12 and 15. So that will allow states to vaccinate their middle school students before fall.
Right, well, that is good to know. Meanwhile, so I hear concerns are mounting over the Indian variant, that is, with more Korean nationals poised to return home.
Right, Sunny. Following some 370 South Korean citizens who have returned from India earlier this month on 2 separate flights, now 2 of Korea's major airliners have scheduled 7 more flights for the end of this month, that is. And this is because of the fear of catching the virus over in India while not receiving adequate treatment, while the World Health Organization has upgraded the classification of the variant in India from a variant of interest to a variant of concern. Here's more.
There is some available information to suggest increased transmissibility of B.1.617. There is a preprint that is out. So this is a paper that has not undergone peer review, and it's of a limited number of patients, suggesting that there is some reduced neutralization. And as such, we are classifying this as a variant of concern at the global level.
So let's take a look at the numbers over in the countries with the highest number of increases here. India at almost 23 million. We've got some 329,000 infections in the past 24 hours as of noon Korea time. A little over 38,000 infections in the US. And also here, Brazil, Argentina, and Iran are some countries that are still seeing very high cases on a daily basis. And the total number of infections around the world stands at 159.5 million, with over 631,000 cases reported in just a day. And those are the updates I have for now. I'll be back in a bit after the government briefing. Sunny?
All right, so thank you for that. Now, meanwhile, in a public address to mark his 4th year in office earlier on Monday, President Moon Jae-in reaffirmed his commitment to vaccination efforts. I have Kim Dami here in the studio with details on that. Welcome, Dami.
Good afternoon, Sunny.
Right, then let's begin with the gist of Monday's public address.
Sure, Sunny. President Moon said COVID-19 will be his top agenda during the last year of his presidency, and that, excuse me, It's the end of the pandemic is now on the horizon. He said vaccinations are picking up steam and that more than 13 million Koreans will get their shots in the first half of the year. Moon was optimistic and that the current pace of rollouts could help the country fast-track its timeline of reaching herd immunity. Take a listen.
9월 말까지 접종 대상 국민 전원에 대한 1차 접종을 마쳐 11월 집단 면역 달성 목표를 당초 계획보다 앞당길 것입니다.
The president also vowed to spare no effort in securing more doses as well as developing homegrown vaccines. He added that the government will make the most out of its medical infrastructure to scale up the distribution of vaccines. He also emphasized that the government will fully back the development of local vaccines to achieve vaccine sovereignty and help prepare the country for a drawn-out pandemic.
동시에 세계 2위의 바이오 의약품 생산 능력을 바탕으로 백신 생산의 글로벌 허브가 되도록 전폭적인 지원을 아끼지 않겠습니다.
The president did acknowledge, however, that it would have been better if the country's vaccination program had started a little earlier, but he did applaud the country's health authorities for taking a prudent, situation-oriented strategy to import and administer vaccines. He said the country's healthcare officials should be given credit for executing their plan with great precision and without any delays. President Moon stressed that Korea's current outbreak still remains at a manageable level and that the fatality rate is much lower compared to other countries.
Right, and Thami, authorities, I believe, will be footing the bill for those being treated for post-inoculation conditions, I hear.
That's right. So starting next Monday, people who have been hospitalized after getting their shots will be eligible to receive up to around $9,000 even if there's no clear evidence of a causal link. Take a listen.
Our latest measure is aimed at strengthening the government's accountability and protecting vaccine recipients who've experienced adverse reactions, especially severe cases, with insufficient evidence to establish a clear causal link to the vaccines.
So up until now, the government has covered the cost of hospitalization and treatment only if there was a proven causal link between the vaccine and side effects. The KDC said Monday that anyone suffering from post-vaccination side effects can apply for compensation. And an independent panel will review all applications, and those with serious underlying health conditions will be excluded. And applications can be submitted by the patients themselves or by a family member on their behalf at a community health centers in their region.
I see. All right, then one more question, Dami, before you go. I hear the military is looking to allow group leaves. Could you tell us more about this, please?
Sure. The Korean military says the group leaves will not affect the country's military readiness. The nation's defense ministry said on Monday that the service members in patrons and companies that share the same living quarters will be able to venture off base in groups. But this does not apply to all units, and the individual factors will be taken into account.
Maintaining our high state of readiness is still our top priority, so the leaves will take place in a manner that does not affect our defense posture.
To maintain the military state of readiness, the leaves will be limited to 35% of all soldiers in a unit at any given time. That's still up from the previous 20%. Service members returning from leave will use their own living quarters in the barracks and to spend their time in self-quarantine.
I see. All right, Dami. As always, thank you very much for the coverage.
My pleasure.
Right, it's time now for the regular briefing on the COVID-19 situation here in Korea for this Tuesday. The weather has been quite pleasant since the start of this week, and health experts are highlighting the importance of proper and frequent ventilation of indoor spaces to ensure a healthy flow of fresh air amid concerns of COVID-19 transmission within enclosed settings. Also, remember to have your face masks on at all times outside of your homes to limit potential exposure to the virus. Now, while we wait for the briefing to start, here are a few words related to the possible discomforts after COVID-19 vaccination. First then, feeling uncomfortable for up to 48 hours post-inoculation is said to be a normal phenomenon. This is reportedly one indication that the vaccine is working. Now, common side effects include pain at the site of injection, fatigue and headaches. So secondly, with regard to ways to minimize discomfort, here are a few natural remedies. Try applying a cold cloth or pack on the injection site, or try gently moving your vaccinated arm to stimulate blood flow to disperse the local area of inflammation. For those suffering from fatigue, get some rest, while for fever, drink plenty of water. The briefing is about to start. We'll come back to you afterwards.
I am a director of the Disaster Safety and Disaster Control, and here we are likely to begin our regular briefing for today, May 11th, Tuesday. And here are some updates on our COVID-19 vaccination. Yesterday alone, we have had the bookings of the vaccination appointments, and about 21% of the eligible group of people have completed their booking for the vaccination appointments. And also this is after the age group of the 70 and 74, and this is about 2 times of their reservation rate, which hovered only around 11% on the first day. And we say that this has signals and implies that the public consensus on the need of vaccines is being expanded. And we ask you to also book your vaccination appointments via online. And if your children are doing this process on behalf of the parents, please make sure that you can do so by verifying the person's identification as well. And also, regardless of the residential area, you could also select the designated hospitals to get the vaccines. And within these periods of time for the reservations, please take use of this time period and also take use of the vaccinations as well. And here are also updates on our supply of COVID-19 vaccines. And as for Pfizer vaccines, we have an additional of 438,000 doses to arrive in Incheon International Airport tomorrow. And in the first half of this year, we plan to have 7 million doses. And with this, we will have about 2.84 million that have already arrived in Korea. And going forward, within the next few weeks and months of time, we will have the rest of the 4 million doses arrive as well on a weekly basis. And we have some updates on the new variants here in South Korea as well. The quarantine authorities are intensifying our related analysis and assessment for the quarantines related to the new variants. And as for foreigners, we aimed to have about 5% of the targets. However, we aim to have about 15% of the genetic study done for the Korean personnel. And we identified 176 new variants, and out of them, 154 were UK variant, 22 were South African variants. And after October last year, we have identified until now a total of 808 new variants. And by categories, we have 705 UK variants and 73 that is South African variants and 10 Brazilian variants. And during the past week, we have looked at the sources of infection of the 176 new cases, and we have identified 22 at points of entry and also 13 while they were on self-quarantine. And we have 141 identified as local transmissions, and we have been identifying them through our epidemiological investigations. And recently we saw in Ulsan City the spread of the UK variant, and also in Gyeonggi province we have seen the South African variants that have been rampantly spreading. However, we believe that this has been on a slowdown increase, and also we believe that there are still sporadic outbreaks of these variants, and this is why we are carrying out a joint effort to investigate and analyze the new variants going forward. And to this end, we have expanded the target of our preemptive testings, and we also will be bolstering our inspection and monitoring for related services. And here are also updates on the Korean nationals who arrived in South Korea from India. And starting from 4th of May, we have 3 rounds of Korean people returning to Korea from India. We have about 500 of them that have arrived, and also we have seen the new variants as well. And in India, for your information, we have seen that the country is accounting for about 47% of our total global infections, and the virus is spreading rampantly. And this is why the Korean authorities are exerting our full efforts to identify and monitor the situation, and we will also intensify our quarantine for those who are coming in from India. And those countries around the world which have rolled out the vaccines in an earlier stage, they have seen a decline in daily infections. And here in South Korea, we are seeing a spread of new variants. Once we had about 607 to even 700 daily cases. However, this has dropped to about 400 to 500. However, we believe that this is and that this shall not be a reason for us to stay complacent. Until the day we have a certain level of immunity among the public through vaccinations, it is very important that we continue to exert our full efforts to comply with the quarantine measures. In order to return to a healthy society, it is very important that we protect ourselves through COVID-19 vaccinations. And if you have any clinical symptoms of COVID-19, please get tested as soon as possible. If you live with senior citizens, please help them so that they can get the COVID-19 vaccines. And before they get their jabs, please monitor their health conditions as well. And this also applies to post-inoculation as well. The quarantine authorities will also make our full efforts to return to a state of normalcy as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Right, there was Lee Sang-won with Tuesday's afternoon briefing. So what did he have to say?
Well, we should start with updates on variant cases here in the country, as 176 new variant cases have been detected recently, and that includes 154 UK variant cases and 21 the South African strain. And 22 of those were detected at the nation's checkpoints, such as at the airport, and 13 during the self-isolation period, while 141 cases were domestic transmission. So that really shows us how much these domestic transmissions are now outnumbering cases that are actually coming directly from abroad. And the concern is especially in the city of Ulsan, with the UK variant now being the dominant strain there. And also recently cases of the South African variant have been detected in Gyeonggi-do province. Also more than around 438,000 Pfizer doses are expected to arrive tomorrow on Wednesday. That was the latest on the vaccination rollout updates. And I also want to update the number of people who came from India recently. That's around 540 according to the official. So during 3 batches that arrived here in Korea.
I see. All right. So as always, thank you very much for that.
Anytime.
Also in related news, the pandemic has changed parenting patterns, as movement restrictions have created greater opportunity for both parents, in particular fathers, to become more engaged in child rearing. Do take a look.
The COVID-19 pandemic is adding to the burden of childcare being faced by many parents in Korea. The country is witnessing a growing number of men who are taking parental leave, which rose more than 23% on year in 2020 as a global health crisis continued to unfold. Korea has also seen a 20% increase in the number of stay-at-home dads, many of whom have either lost their jobs or stopped looking for employment opportunities in the aftermath of the pandemic.
지난해 1월 말에 코로나19가 이제 한국에서 이렇게 확산이 되면서 2월 초에 정부가 가장 먼저 시행한 정책이 어린이집, 유치원, 학교의 문을 닫는 것이었죠. 그런데 코로나 상황에서 누구도 이 돌봄을 대신해 줄 수가 없기 때문에 결국 이제 부모가 맡아야 되는데, 한국 사회에서도 30대의 그 젊은 아빠들을 중심으로 해서 돌봄 참여가 늘어나고 있고, 그 중에는 극히 소수이긴 하지만 일시적이라고 하더라도 자기가 전적으로 아이를 맡아서 키우겠다, 이런 선택을 내리는 남성들도 있는데, 이건 대단히 좀 바람직한 현상이 아닐까, 그렇게 해석이 됩니다.
This charity group, based in the city of Yongin, south of Seoul, is running a program to support stay-at-home dads in the community.
경기도 아빠 하이 사업은 경기도가 기획을 하고 저희 경기도 여성가족재단이 위탁을 받아 운영하고 있는 사업인데요. 경기도 31개 시군 전역에서 1000여 명의 아버님들이 참여하시면서 아이와 일상을 공유하고 성장할 수 있도록 지원하는 온오프라인 육아 네트워크라고 할 수 있습니다.
아빠 이거 봐봐. 근데
Many stay-at-home dads who signed up for the program were desperate to get any help they could find in raising their children amid the pandemic.
그냥 놀아주니까 다빈이 어땠어요?
재밌었어요.
다들 비슷하실 건데 아이들이 집에 있는 시간이 길어지다 보니까 엄마의 육아가 좀 시간이 좀 많이 늘어났잖아요. 아이들과 있는 시간이. 그러다 보니까 그 엄마가 약간 육아 스트레스? 뭐 이런 우울감? 뭐 이런 게 생길 수도 있을 것 같더라고요.
The dads are given a number of tasks in the program, which they have to complete with their children through playtime and education. It allows them to naturally take part in childcare duties by engaging in a diverse array of stimulating activities.
하다 보니까 아기가 어떻게 반응하는지 보는 재미가 더 사실 즐겁더라고요. 그리고 그래서 미션은 부수적인 게 되고 그걸 계기로 저희 아이와 교감할 수 있는 기회가 돼서 너무 즐겁게 하고 있습니다.
The participants also get together in groups of 4 or less to share their personal stories of raising their children and to offer each other tips.
제가 육아에 대해서 자신감을 좀 갖다 보니까 아이들도 그걸 좀 느끼는 것 같더라고요. 그래서 예전에는 뭐 이렇게 와이프가 좀 없으면 제가 좀 불안해하다 보니까 아이들도 같이 좀 정서적으로 불안한 느낌을 받았는데 요즘은 제가 이제 뭐 이렇게 같이 셋이만 있어도 재밌게 이렇게 할 수 있는 그런 상황이 생긴 것 같습니다.
사실은 지금 30대 아버지들은 아이를 함께 키우고 싶어 하는 분들이 많습니다. 그리고 아이를 키우는 것이 뭐 의무이기도 하고 부담이기도 하지만 또 책임이기도 하고 또 즐거움이라는 것도 알아요. 이제 이런 부분이 잘 이렇게 실현이 되려면 결국 국가와 사회가 그것을 보장해 줄 수 있어야 합니다.
The changing reality of families with children amid the pandemic will need fathers to step up and play a more prominent role as caregivers for their children.
আমার ফার্স্ট প্রায়োরিটি এখন হবে যেহেতু কোভিড ইজ মাই ফার্স্ট প্রায়োরিটি
Isso é uma vergonha, rapaz. Isso é uma palhaçada desses políticos safados, muquiranos.
Making it the 6th vaccine to receive WHO validation for safety, efficacy, and quality.
Nebudeme žiadať žiadne podmienky a chceme takto odstrániť akúkoľvek prekážku na to, aby sa koalícia mohla zhodnúť.
Resurgences, vaccine shortages, related diplomacy and the pandemic blame game. Now, these are some of the issues sparked by COVID-19 across the globe, and we take a closer look at them in today's studio session. I have Professor Min Jong-hoon from the Korean National Diplomatic Academy. Welcome back, Professor Min.
My pleasure.
Right then, the World Health Organization, Professor Min, has granted its green light to China's Sinopharm vaccine for emergency global use. What is the significance of this approval?
Well, basically, I think we are witnessing that this COVID-19 vaccines are very important to get out of the global pandemic. And all of the countries want to secure enough vaccines for their people. And China has been conducting the very active vaccine diplomacy, and it is offering its vaccines to the Latin American and the African countries. Specifically, China has offered its vaccines to over 80 countries. That's amazing. But the countries got a little bit different opinions about using Chinese vaccines. It's mainly because they did not show, Chinese vaccines did not show as much safety and effectiveness as other Western vaccines did. So this time, what the WHO approved to Chinese vaccines will contribute to enhancing people's perception on Chinese vaccine safety and effectiveness. So I expect that more countries want the Chinese vaccines, and China's vaccine diplomacy can have a momentum to move forward.
Right, and I understand that this is the first time for the global health body to grant emergency use approval for any Chinese vaccine for an infectious disease, right?
Yes, but it'll take a little bit more time for the second type of the vaccine. But many people expect that all types of the Chinese vaccines will be approved by the WHO. So the Chinese vaccines will have the effectiveness and the global influence on all over the world.
Right. Professor Min, the pandemic also appears to be affecting politics, as we saw in that video. Now, some people are condemning their government's handling of COVID-19, as is the case in India and also over in Brazil. Now, having said that, what are your thoughts on the role of the pandemic in the arena of politics over the past 1 year?
Well, basically, COVID-19 has been one of the important factors that can affect the voters' decisions around the world. And the many factors can affect how people make up their minds on election day. And one of them is how the voters evaluate on the incumbent candidates, their job performances during their terms. I mean, the voters look back when they make up their minds about how well the incumbent candidates, president party, have done their jobs during their terms. And usually the economic conditions of the election year significantly affects the voters' evaluations on the incumbent president party. But when a nation has a national crisis like the COVID-19 and the economic crisis, how the incumbent president and party cope with the such crisis could significantly affect the voters' decisions. And for example, think about what happened in the 2020 U.S. presidential election. Before COVID-19, the serious hit the United States. The President Trump, the people said that President Trump would easily get reelected. But after the COVID-19 seriously hit the United States, everything has changed, right? And specifically, President Trump got the controversy about his administration's response to the spread of the virus in its territory. And sadly, so many people died in the United States, and its economy was seriously damaged. And as a result, the President Trump failed to get reelected. And I think that the same situation happened in India. And I expect that we can see more similar cases in the upcoming elections all over the world.
Right. Now, for a broader look at the political and diplomatic reaches of the pandemic, we expand our talk today to include journalists from Russia here in the region and from Brazil across the globe. I have Luana Ferreira joining us from Brasilia. Hello again, Luana.
Hello, Sunny. Thank you for inviting me again.
You're very welcome. And I also have Uliana Pavlova over in Moscow. Good to see you again, Uliana.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Right then, Luana, we'll start with you. Before we delve into the political situation in Brazil, do tell us a bit about the COVID-19 situation in Brazil then.
Well, after the social distance measures that we took in April last month, we have seen the numbers start to drop for the first time in many months. Compared to the last month, we had a drop of 30% of the case. But to be honest, it's like we are stuck in endless looping, because while we are seeing the whole world moving forward and improving with the case, we are still talking about everything, the measures that we were talking in March last year. Social distance, we're still dealing with a leader, a president who is still not taking seriously the pandemic, what's going on. And for example, last week, he was pretending that he was suffocating with COVID during a live on Facebook. And on top of that, we also have to worry about how low is the vaccination in Brazil. When you look at the total numbers, there are 35 million people who are vaccinated, but it represents only 16% of the population in Brazil. It's not because we don't have the capacity to vaccinate or we don't have the ways to afford the vaccines. It's just because it's not a priority of the government.
I see. And we'll get into that later on. But first then, Uliana, I understand that health authorities in Russia have spoken of reaching herd immunity this coming September. Could you tell us a bit about this, Uliana?
Right. So the Russian government has promised that Russia will be able to reach herd immunity by September. However, if you look at the vaccination rollout campaign in Russia, it actually has been moving at a very slow pace. Yesterday, President Vladimir Putin came out and he said that 21.5 million people in Russia have already received the first dose of the vaccine, which means around 14% of the general population. And this is, of course, is a far cry from the 70% needed to reach herd immunity. However, you know, when we look at Russia, Russia is a big country. So the situation with the vaccination rollout in the regions might look very differently than the one in Moscow. But even when we look at Moscow, where vaccine is in vast supply, we're seeing that only about 10% of Moscow's population have been vaccinated. And this in part due to vaccine skepticism. People still are not eager to get vaccinated, and it's very interesting to see the Russian government actually coming up with different incentives to get people vaccinated. For example, now you can get vaccinated at your home, and elderly people now receive certain benefits and certain coupons that they can buy certain services and groceries on if they get vaccinated.
I see. Meanwhile, Luana, you mentioned how vaccination does not appear to be a priority in Brazil, and perhaps it's because Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro faces criminal investigation and possible impeachment over his response to the pandemic. What are the political implications of this latest event in Brazil?
Well, yes, right now there is a parliamentary investigation, and this investigation, it aims to investigate the role of Bolsonaro in one of the world's COVID outbreaks in the world. And it can be crucial for the government and even for the Bolsonaro re-election next year, because if it's proven that he made the things worse regarding the pandemic, he might be impeached according to the Brazilian constitution. And during the coming 90 days, this commission will listen to several people from the Bolsonaro's administration who were involved in the COVID, and this included 3 of his health minister, former health minister, and the current health minister of Brazil, and they will analyze several topics, including things that made the headlines all over the world. For example, the shortage of oxygen in the hospitals in Amazon that happened in January, the support of Bolsonaro for treatments against COVID that are not proof that they work out, like the chloroquine, and of course the delay in vaccination.
Right. Meanwhile, Uliana, you spoke about the vaccine hesitancy in the country, but regardless of that, though, what has been the public response to Moscow's active vaccine diplomacy in the international arena among the people in Russia?
So Sputnik is seen as a very important soft power tool by Russia and Putin. And in fact, I think the Russian government is actually more preoccupied with securing the Sputnik vaccine doses for the international markets. And the perception of the Sputnik vaccine is very important on the international stage. However, here in Russia, you know, people are, I think the Sputnik vaccine in a lot of ways encompasses the Cold War space race and the show of scientific significance in Russia. So far, I think when it comes to the international stage, Russia is very supportive of Sputnik, and the EU is actually considering approving Sputnik on the EU-wide level by undergoing the European Medical Agency review. And that's also very important for regular Russians because they are concerned about, summer travel and whether or not they will be able to visit the EU and so forth.
Right. Meanwhile, Professor Min, staying with Russia's vaccine diplomacy, some pundits are claiming that Russia's vaccine diplomacy is serving to divide Europe. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, basically, I think that European countries have a little different opinions and situations on Russian vaccines based on their political and diplomatic relationships with Russia and the availability of vaccines for their people. I think in the initial period of the global pandemic, most countries preferred to have the Western vaccines, which means that the vaccines produced in the US and England and Germany over Russian vaccines. It's mainly because as you know, the Russian vaccines did not show as much safety and effectiveness as other Western vaccines. Of course, the Russian vaccines got much better evaluations nowadays. But many of the Eastern European countries, like Hungary and Slovakia, could not secure enough the Western vaccines. And instead they got the Russian vaccines. And even before the Russian vaccines were approved by the European Union. And now the vaccine distribution situation is getting better in Europe. So we got a little more political disputes about using the Russian vaccines in those European countries, like there are political disputes over Russian vaccine safety and Russia's increased influence to recipient countries. And in those European countries, they are using the Russian vaccines to pull their political disputes in their own territorial countries. So it seems that nowadays the vaccines are getting more politicized in various ways all over the world.
Right, unfortunately. Luana, while not naming China, President Bolsonaro last week suggested the coronavirus was created by China as part of a bacteriological warfare. Do tell us a bit about this fallout between the Brazilian leadership and its main vaccine raw material supplier.
Sure. Actually, it's not a surprise because every time Bolsonaro and his children, they are in the center of a political crisis, they find they have an effective way to change the focus of the conversation. They just create another crisis. And they say no-sense things or shocking sentence that's impossible to ignore. And this was one of them. Last week, he insinuated that China created the virus and it's a chemical weapon. But we have two problems there now for Brazil. First, because we already have a strained relationship with China, and it's our biggest commercial country in the world. And this relationship is strained due to those comments that comes from the president, from his children, even from the foreign minister. And now we are going to have a delay in the vaccination because we rely on China for have the ingredients to make the coronavac vaccine. And now we are going to have a delay from June on, and we are not sure how the calendar of the vaccination will be from now on.
I see, unfortunately. Professor Min, the Biden administration has voiced support for efforts to lift patent protection on COVID-19 vaccines. What are your thoughts on this shift in stance?
Well, basically at this point, I think it's not clear whether it's possible for those vaccines to become free public goods and how much time it will take. I'm not sure how much time it will take before those vaccines can be free to produce. It's mainly because countries and the vaccine produce companies have different opinions about that. So we'll see what will actually happen in the coming months. Meanwhile, this seems to be clear that the Biden administration, U.S. want to move forward to advance its vaccine diplomacy. As you know, China is leading vaccine diplomacy, and it is increasing its influence all over the world using the vaccine power. Meanwhile, as I mentioned earlier, U.S. lost so many lives, and its economy was serious damage due to the pandemic. And so to get out of the horrible situations, the Biden administration or the U.S., the Trump administration, tried to secure as much vaccines as possible. And in terms of that kind of U.S. efforts, the other countries got the serious difficulties in securing vaccines for their people. And as the COVID-19 situations in the United States is getting better, and the Biden administration want to improve a little bit the U.S. image by playing more active roles in the distributing vaccines all over the world. And it also want to catch up with China in the vaccine diplomacy. But anyway, in the process of the securing vaccines, the U.S. clearly showed to the international community how much countries could be selfish in a global crisis.
Right. Staying with that, Uliana, how is Moscow responding to Washington's support of waiving patent protection on COVID-19 vaccines?
President Vladimir Putin is actually very supportive of this proposal of waiving patent protections. And in fact, he said that we should not think of exacting maximum profit, but we should ensure people's safety. And as I said, this goes along with what I said earlier, that Sputnik in a lot of ways is a soft power tool for Russia. So in ways when United States and Pfizer and Moderna vaccines were not able to get to certain countries, Russia stepped up. And at the same time, you know, Sputnik is built on a different technology than Moderna and Pfizer vaccines. So there have been suspicions that Russia might steal the technology or China might steal the technology, but that's not something that's been even talked about in Russia. In fact, Putin made sure to say that Sputnik is built on a different technology, and even though it might be not as innovative, it is very reliable, and as he said, it's as reliable as the Kalashnikov firearm. So that was his analogy.
Right. Professor Min, meanwhile, top diplomats to the G7 meeting over in London earlier this month vowed active collaboration on the vaccine front. Could you tell us a bit about this united effort?
Well, I think it's meaningful because this shows that the major countries, like the G7 countries, will be more committed to distribute the COVID-19 vaccines all over the world. As you know, the COVID-19 situations in the other G7 countries and other major countries are getting better because more people are taking the vaccine shots in those developed and rich countries. But still, there are so many people who are suffering from the virus in the developing and the poor countries. So it is imperative to provide the vaccines for these countries as soon as possible. And it is also necessary for the whole world to get vaccinated, to get out of the pandemic completely. So to do that, I think much more vaccines should be produced with a reasonable price. And the G7 countries and the other major countries like the South Korea can lead such a movement because they have enough capabilities and the influence to do that. And if these major countries exert responsible leadership, it will contribute to getting back to the normal life as early as possible.
Right. And talking about leadership, Professor Min, what strategy do you propose for Korea amid the changing power dynamics in the global diplomatic arena?
Well, basically, I think that South Korea needs to play a more active role in the vaccine diplomacy as a responsible middle power country. So most importantly, South Korea needed to secure the herd immunity in its the territory through vaccinations as scheduled. In addition, South Korea needed to play a more active role in the international community's joint efforts to cope with the pandemic all over the world. Specifically, South Korea can share its successful quarantine experience to controlling the spread of the virus. And South Korea can also make the meaningful financial contributions and offer medical supplies like facial masks and COVID-19 cures. And South Korea can also be the production, the basis for the reliable vaccines for the global community. So I think such commitment will contribute to the enhancing South Korea's global stance as a responsible, trustworthy middle power country in the international community.
Right. All right, Professor Min, thank you very much for your insights. And Luana, thank you very much for your time today, as well as Uliana over in Russia. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us.
Right. While the response to the pandemic may differ depending on the country, the goal largely remains the same, and that is to ensure public health. Thank you for watching.